Hey everyone, just wanted to put something at the start of this episode saying that we will be hosting our first ever live stream for our reactions to the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. You'll be able to find it right here on our YouTube channel on Wednesday, April 2nd at 9 a.m. Eastern. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss it. Now, enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome to the Controller Collective podcast, episode 3. My name is Peyton, and I'm joined with our two fabulous co-stars. Or, well, I guess I'm technically me and Talon are the co-stars, and I'm just doing the intro today.
Hey, it's a group effort, man.
Yeah.
Tell
Um,
what's so funny.
Nothing.
I figured I'd give the intro today because I'm also providing the topic for today's podcast. Um, Kind of tying in with what I was talking about at the end of our last episode, um, I thought that the topic of today's podcast could be sort of the philosophy around video games being an art form and how video games can affect us as a person and change us. So I guess let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Let's get
Um,
into it.
Thanks for the commentary, everyone. I love repeating what Peyton said.
um, Well, I think it's an interesting thing to just touch on briefly is that we're kind of in a way stepping on um, the we're kind of on the what do they say? We're standing on giants because there's a lot of people who came before us in the more early days of video games who kind of fought for video games to be seen as an art form instead of just like as a plaything, like a board game and such. Um, like what comes to mind is oh shoot. Um, Extra Credit. I don't know if you guys have ever watched Extra Credit.
I have not.
I
Oh,
have not either.
okay. Then I'm probably no one knows what I'm talking about, but they come to mind as like some of the earliest people I know who really like carried the torch, especially on YouTube, about video games being an art form. Unfortunately, they kind of fell off in the modern day, but back in the heyday, they were really good. Um, I think we've kind of come quite a long quite a long way in terms of people seeing video games more as an art form than it used to be. But in a way, I think there's still like a general population out there who might not see video games in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of one example of someone who doesn't think of video games as art. That'd be Roger Ebert, the famous film critic. He was known for debating very strongly that video games, by definition, could not be art. Um, Basically, he described video games. Well, he made the distinction. He said you can win a game. It has rules, points, objectives, and an outcome. And that if a game does not have those elements, it ceases to be a game. So in his mind, there was like just, oh, what's it called? Like a semantic distinction. That's not the right word. But by definition, he thought video games could not be art.
Wow, Talon. It almost seems like you wrote a paper on this topic.
Yeah, it's crazy.
um, I feel that that's an interesting but ill-informed take. Like, I understand where he's coming from, but I like video games are a lot more than that because not only like there's a lot of art forms that I think are connected with video games because you can separate like the writing of the game, which by itself you could write a book with, so that's a form of art, and you could separate the music, which is also a form of art, and you can also separate the all of the artwork that goes into it. So I feel like when you're pushing putting that much work and art just separated into one product, I don't understand necessarily how someone could see, well, you're just um a game as being one, but an actual piece of art you have to like think about, I suppose, is his point. But I don't know, that's just interesting to me. It seems kind of like an ill-informed point.
I'm not 100% sure what to bring to this part of the discussion because for me personally, I've always seen games as something to be appreciated, like in the same way that movies or books are.
Hmm.
It's kind of the same thing for me. They're all telling a story in their own way. So in terms of that, I don't really have anything to say because I've always considered games to be art, no matter what they're trying to do.
Yeah,
So
I I think it's um I think it can also be interesting to say, like, to just for the sake of argument, that in a way video games are kind of the best way to tell a story, um just because of how much what's the just how much somebody the person has to interact with the art. Like, say you're watching a movie or looking at a painting, you kind of, in all forms of art, you have to make that intentional um, decision to um, interact with the art. But I think video games, it just comes so naturally to interact with the art form because it is an interactive art form in and of itself. So in a way, I think it can affect the consumers. Uh, I guess that's the word for it. Um, in a more intense way, in my opinion, than necessarily a lot of different forms of art. Um, and not only that, but when you combine this with things like stunning visuals, um, well well written story, and music, it can really also affect the emotions of the player as well in a serious way that I think um, can't be really done or stimulated in the same way, or simulated was the word I was looking for, in a similar way with any other form of art. So that's just kind of my argument. I don't know where you guys would fall in such an argument.
Yeah, I think I fall kind of under the same vein. I think just like, let's say traditional art, it is viewed passively. Of course, it is seen as an art form. Movies, it's also pretty much a passive experience for the viewer. I think many people would also agree that can be considered art. But I think the difference that a lot of people immediately think of when it comes to this argument is that, like, video games are interactive by
Mm.
nature, and is that enough to say that it shouldn't ever be art? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of games that can be great examples of video games as art. Uh, One example that I've played in the past is What Remains of Edith Finch. It
Mm.
basically, like,
Really good game.
tells, yes, very good game. Although I wasn't fond of parts of it, just because I felt like it was, I don't know how to describe it. Just like the decisions that the characters made and the way that they were thinking just seemed a little off to me.
Mm.
But I suppose it could be seen as logical for some people. But anyway, in the game, if you've never played it, basically you play as Edith Finch and you experience stories of past family members. And you play through those stories uh, based on what their journal entry or their final journal entry was usually. Not necessarily journals. Sometimes it's just artifacts. Like one of them, there's a comic book or whatnot.
I think one of
But
them was a
either
can.
way, yeah, can opener. But the game really uses what's it called? It uses a lot of narrative and storytelling elements, as well as just kind of the way the game is presented with its style, and it all kind of meshes together in a really beautiful way as a means of artistic storytelling. And I think it's a game that is absolutely worthy of being considered art.
Yeah, and I think just for the sake of like, I think just bringing up a counterpoint or a counter argument, I guess would be, would you consider all video games art? Because I could see, like, especially somebody bringing up like maybe a crappy Call of Duty FPS, letting or yeah, that's kind of what I think would come to mind to most people. Is like a crappy Call of Duty esque, or Call of Duty, a specific like maybe Ghosts. Um, like, could you still consider that art? And I think um, it's an interesting counterpoint to argue, because art is still involved with even a lot of, like, even the worst of necessarily like a Call of Duty game. Like if we're thinking about Ghosts, there's still a lot of visuals that had to be drawn up and rendered, which is like physical art, and then there's also music that was involved in Ghost. So art went into it. So I think the distinction with that counterpoint would be, it's still a piece of art, but it's a bad piece of art. Not that it just doesn't become art anymore because it's a crappy FPS or a bad game.
Yeah, it might be interesting to consider um, if it should be viewed as art, if it didn't have any intention of being viewed that way. Because I'm
Hmm.
sure, especially a lot of like early arcade games are coming to mind. Like, I don't know if the makers of Pong would necessarily consider that they were creating art when they were creating that game. But I'm sure some people would argue it still is art. I can't go that far. I feel like that a game has to be made with intention to like make the player think and reflect, I suppose, would be one way of putting it.
Yeah, I think that is a good way of putting it. Um, I suppose, yeah. Um, but kind of what I'm thinking about is like, say for the sake of argument, like super, like early on, like I'm thinking specifically of like Super Mario World, but I guess the first Mario game could also be included, and like kind of like the point of art is to make you feel a certain way, and I'd almost argue that with early arcade games, or more case early video games, maybe like Atari and NES, especially like Super Mario World, or the first Mario Brothers, um, kind of, it was a form of art in the way that they were thinking they wanted the player of that game to feel certain emotion, to feel a sense of completion, fun, and happiness, and to associate that with that game, I suppose. Um, but that's just kind of like my knee jerk response to someone saying that maybe even older, that these older games weren't a form of art. Just like in a way, I guess you could see it as a form of art, as I was saying, because they were kind of putting out this goal to make a player feel a certain way, which is kind of also the goal with most physical, um, normal, what people think of as the arts.
I think for me, I feel kind of the opposite way of Talon, because Talon said that games have to like make an attempt to make you reflect, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, I'm gonna use Smash as an example, Smash Brothers Ultimate as an example here. I think
Mhm.
it is an art form that all of these, legacy gaming characters and all these franchises are being celebrated in this game. And even take a game like Fortnite, for example, that you wouldn't think of as art.
Mhm.
It, whether it is that way or not, it is still a celebration of a lot of pop culture icons and um, things that are happening. And I think that is, in a way, art. Because, art is subjective. So
Yeah,
we all have different opinions on it. But that celebration and that togetherness, to me, is art.
I think that's quite succinctly put.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from there. And I think there's definitely merit to say, like, the things that people do in the game as well could maybe be considered an art form. Like mastering a character in Smash Bros, for example,
Mm.
and pulling off crazy combos yeah, that could be considered an art form. I don't think I could deny that. Just like Rocket League freestyling is almost definitely art in its own way. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe my opinion's getting changed a little here. I
Mhm.
haven't thought that deeply about where the line lies in my head for video games being art.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair given, as Jarek said, kind of the subjective nature of art. We kind of almost, I think, take for granted that something is art or that we feel a certain way. And only when we bring up conversations like this where we actually delve into how we feel, we can kind of untangle that web and figure out like really how we feel about a certain something. Um,
I guess. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to bring up. I felt what you guys were saying about these kind of more typical esports games, um, being able to be really good at them is their own art form. I just thought it would be interesting to hear you guys's like take on because uh, just for the viewers' information, we all went to high school in the same place, which was a kind of a small rural high school, and there was kind of this once we started in esports teams at that high school, there was kind of this unspoken like rivalry and anger towards actual sports. Actual sport teams disliked the esports teams because this feeling of that it's not an art form or that it's not a sport. I suppose I should say. Um, so I'd just like to hear like what you guys felt about that because I know you guys were a part of those esports teams and like just not being considered up to par with like normal sports, which would could also like a quarterback throwing a perfect throw could also be considered an art form. You know.
Yeah, I remember our director, our esports director in high school. He had a lot of trouble with our athletic director because, we weren't being treated equally compared to the rest of the teams. And, obviously that is unfair considering we were, I don't want to brag too much, but we were pretty successful in most of our games that we played
I
and competed in.
I dare say you guys were quite a bit more successful than most of our sports teams.
Yes, yes, we were.
And I mean, from students' perspectives, I don't remember having that many bad encounters with students specifically for being on the esports team, but like these are people I knew for like 5 years at this point,
Hmm.
4 years or whatever. So maybe some of the new students that came in when we were in high school didn't understand it as much, but like I had friends who were in football or basketball and that kind of stuff. So at least from my perspective, I didn't see that much. But definitely from an administrative perspective, yeah, it was frustrating.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would say it's mostly the same for me. I never had like big conflicts or rivalries with other people at the school who were students. Most of the pushback really came from like a combination of teachers, school employees, and also parents just questioning like why video games should be like held to the same level of appraisement as sports or something.
Mm-hmm. And
And that's kind of where the difficulty lies.
yeah, and I remember, as far as teacher pushback goes, I remember teachers complaining about like esports being let out early to prepare themselves for a game, just like any other sports team
Yes,
would do.
Talon and I had a very interesting. We were in a class together where we had to leave early to go to an esports game, and we told our teacher about it in the beginning of class. Said, "Hey, we're gonna have to leave early," and he was not happy about that. Is all I'll say.
How dare we leave 10 minutes early to get 10 minutes of warm up for our match against a top team? How
Yeah.
dare we? He talked
Meanwhile,
for like 30
track team
minutes.
and and then we get to leave like hours early and
Golf
Or
team
our
golf
misses
team,
one
yeah.
golf.
full day
Yeah.
a week.
I was just about to bring up the golf pit. What a ridiculous team for our high school to have.
And I also remember that same day that we were getting let out early, we were just chilling at lunch. And then, like, four teachers walk up to us and they're like, "Why does esports need to leave early? Why? Like, we have to warm up. We can't just go in and play our best against a top team
Mhm.
with no warm up. We have to, like, get our fingers ready." As dumb as it sounds, like there's so much hand-eye coordination that's involved in competitive gaming, and you can't just go in straight away and play at your best. You have to have time to warm up.
Yeah, I don't. Oh, I don't. I don't remember exactly what game we were leaving early for. I think
It
it was
was
either
Rocket
Smite.
League.
Okay, it was Rocket League. I was gonna say it was either Smite or Rocket League. And Rocket League especially, you definitely need to like warm up for that
Yeah,
to perform at your best.
something I've just noticed now that I'm more in the esports like sphere, now that I'm a part of an actual team, since I never joined in high school. It's just like, not only do you have to like warm up your fingers and stuff like that, I think warming up also puts you in the right mind space to be ready to play. I feel like just going into a game without it being in that mind space, you're just going to not be able to perform as well.
Absolutely. That is another key thing that warming up does. I mean, even now at college, I take about 30 minutes to an hour to warm up before matches, which it may seem a little overkill, but I have a routine, and the routine helps me enter a flow state better when we're playing in matches and get myself in the right headspace and just be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in terms of like Smash tournaments as well, there are people who will show up like hours early just to play friendlies before the actual bracket starts,
Mm.
and that's its own warm up because you need another person to warm up in Smash Bros.
Um, and just speaking to going back to like um the aggression or rivalry that was apparent at our school. I was not a part of esports in high school, as I stated, but I was a part of our football sports team, and I will say they probably weren't as vocal about it to you guys, but I remember very distinctly about people saying, I believe you guys had a banner revealed to hang in our gym, like any other sports, whenever you guys won a championship,
Yes.
and they're like, that's so effing stupid. You know, people were super PO'd about it on the football team, and I'm like, I think we'll have the right to comment on that, guys, when we actually get back to the championship, seeing we haven't gone to state since 1998. So,
I think we can go even further with that. You get the right to talk when you win a game. But yeah, that I remember there was a little more pushback. But yeah, just in general, it felt like things that were normal for other teams to receive, esports did not get that kind of stuff. Like, I guess just one example was every time our wrestling team made state, which, I mean, that was pretty much every year.
yep.
We would always have a parade in the hallway where all the state wrestlers who qualified, they'd go all the way through the elementary, middle, and high school and get their little parade. And then we went to state probably like 6 or 7 different times for esports. And we got like an announcement in the news once.
Yeah, you got announced before the basketball game once, and like announced before the play once, like our school play.
Ooh, cool.
What, you don't remember that? You were a part of it.
No, I don't remember.
I remember you guys, weren't you guys on the front page of the local newspaper once?
Were we?
Yeah. And
I wouldn't know.
I remember your guys' picture was really funny, so I took a photo of it.
Huh. Oh, that
Um,
might have been our freshman year, actually. I vaguely remember it.
I think it was because that newspaper came out like right before COVID, I think.
Yeah, I think that was our Smash team back then when I was the 6th man.
Heck yeah.
Because then I remember my parents were talking to me about esports, like, "Oh, this is something you want to do?" Because they knew I liked video games, and I was like, I can't really. You guys just didn't really have any games I was good at for like the off season for football, so.
Yeah.
But kind of going back to our topic here, seeing that we're getting
Yeah,
close.
we did get a little off topic.
Yeah.
We got a little sidetracked.
I still think it's important. It kind of plays into the theme of like, video games as an art form and probably not being taken as seriously as other art forms slash sports. I think since we're kind of close to the halfway point, we can kind of shift our focus away from um, discussing discussing fully why video games and art, and more to kind of more personal um, topic of how video games can change us as a person, because as I had touched on before, how interactive the art is, oftentimes you'll play a video game and it can change your opinion on something and you're almost not the same person. There's kind of a before and after you experience that, just like what a really good movie might do to you, or a really good musical or opera.
Who wants to start us off? I mean, Peyton, you
Yeah.
seem like you have a couple examples.
Um, so just kind of like growing up, kind of going back into what we were talking last episode, I suppose. I am kind of like a neurodivergent person, so I think and consider things a lot. My brain just moves at a faster pace than some other people because of my ADHD, the ADD version of it. So I feel like a lot of times video games brought things to my attention that I could think about and consider. And it just interacting with the art form, it could change me. Um, and I think the biggest one that kind of comes to mind, I don't know if I've ever mentioned it before, but one of my favorite games, unfortunately, is Undertale. And I think in my life, I can really pinpoint like Undertale being a before and after game, like I was talking about. Like I was a different person before I heard about and played Undertale. Not only just because, I was in middle school, so there's like you know how the fandom was back there with like a or some people do. I think most people do actually with like the alternate universe versions of them, and just like me being somewhat obsessed with just the fandom and multiple fan works that were coming out at the time, as kind of cringy as they were. But I think um, Undertale kind of really brings a lot of things to mind philosophically. Kind of this concept of um, kind of the where am I going with this? Just like the nature of when I played it, just this idea of should you spare everyone, um, and how kind of how the trailer says like it's a game where no one has to die. In so many games where video games have kind of been um, declared as being very violent. I know that's a problem that's kind of been um, not necessarily a problem, but something that's generally pointed out by older older people who don't fully understand the form. Um, but just to me, considering like Undertale when I was at that age, just this idea of no one has to die, and then the further like philosophical um, moments in the game, such as when you first meet Asgore and the Asgore fight, and just the emotional state that the Asgore fight puts you in, and assuming you are still trying to go for a pacifist route in that, just like the shock that someone that Flowey makes, and kind of the dichotomy of at the beginning of the game, Flowey very adamantly stating to you that um, you live in a world where everything has to be kill or kill, that you have to kill or be killed, that you have to fend for yourself or somebody else is going to kill you, and then being able to carve your own way and deny that synopsis by Flowey, that everything's kill or be killed, and be the nice person even though everything in the underground is trying to attack you, and to be the better person and to try and spare everyone and have a connection with everyone. I think it very much affected me at a young age because I realized um, it's just something that really resonated with me and that I thought about a lot, I suppose, if any of that made sense.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with having Undertale as your favorite game. I mean, I watched a lot of videos on it when it initially came out. I've never played the game for myself besides like one of my friends making me do the Sans fight and watching me fail over and over again. But yeah, it definitely does like raise a lot of moral questions and interesting thoughts. And I guess I can kind of transition into one of my examples because I have a few that have come to mind. Um, as morbid as it may sound, a lot of my favorite games are about death.
Hmm.
Like, two of my favorite games of all time are Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Persona 3. And I won't go into too much about Xenoblade 3 because I think it's an amazing game, and if you haven't played it, you should play it because the story is incredible, and I don't want to ruin that story for anyone. So I will talk about Persona 3. The first thing Persona 3 shows you is the phrase Memento Mori, which means know that you must die. So a lot of the game is focused on this idea of living your life to the fullest and getting the most out of life in your limited time. And I think that really resonated with me because as you go through the game, it's your basic Persona game. You make relationships with people, you build friendships, you help out the town, and Persona 3, the ending, spoilers I guess, but it's basically the most well-known ending in all of gaming. Peyton, close your ears if you don't want to know. uh, at the ending, the main character has to sacrifice himself to save everyone, and that really resonated with me because sometimes you have to make a choice, and the best answer isn't always the easiest one. And just knowing that, he was content with all the decisions he made really makes you think. Also, it was the game that sparked my interest in voice acting.
Hmm.
So that started me down a new journey. So yeah, that's one of my examples, and that's a more recent example because last year I played Persona 3 Reload. But I mean, all of the Persona games have these heavy-handed messages
Hmm.
that are meant to teach you something.
Yeah, and like, um, yeah, as you said, to me it just brings up to mind Persona 5 and how much I kind of uh, associated with it strongly in like late middle school, because of its message of kind of um, rebelling against not necessarily the adult world, but that's kind of, but just like the status quo, I would say more generally, and how you're kind of treated when you're younger. I'm curious to know if you've come up with anything yet, Talon.
I'm really struggling to think of a game that really changed me because I tend to mostly just play competitive games. So I guess, like, I mean, I become a different person over time as I play a game, just more from the interactions that I have with people, and
Mm.
just kind of due to the fact that I'm growing as a person over the multiple years that I play a game. Like, I guess, for example, when it comes to Rocket League, like when I started out playing, I would still get angry at video games nonstop. Like, I
Mhm.
would be just very tilted almost any time I started losing, and the game kind of taught me over many years that getting angry at things doesn't make the problems better. You just kind of have to push through it and then enter your next game with a positive mentality, and don't waste any energy on things you can't control.
Mhm.
And that was kind of a lesson that I just learned over multiple years playing the game. It wasn't really the game itself, but just kind of an outside lesson that I learned over a long time playing it.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point where like, um, even not necessarily a game that has a explicit message that it's supposed to be sending, it can still be like a vessel for, like in your case, it was for persistence, and being able to grit your teeth and understand that there's more to your career in this game than just one game and losing one game and being able to move on. I think also shows that, sometimes that games can really facilitate, building these emotions, and kind of reshaping you as a person in a way, just like a lot of other great forms of art.
I think that is one of the many benefits to video games as a medium. Like, we all have very different tastes in gaming,
Hmm.
which is one of its strengths is that, like, we are all very different, but, like, this is kind of like the aspect of video games as a whole brings us together, even though we don't all play the same things.
Yeah, like the greater video game community has really brought together a lot of people who've been able to form kind of smaller communities underneath these things and meet other similar like-minded people and debate and bicker and just in general, I suppose, uh, really bond over this art form. The only bad thing I can think of is Gamergate, but I don't really want to get into Gamergate.
What's Gamergate? I've never heard of that,
uh,
even though it sounds like something I should have heard of.
it was kind of like in the 2010s. do you kind of remember how like there was that kind of form of gamer who was angry at like women and like certain um like aspects of things that got put into gaming. Um
I feel like those are still very prevalent, but continue.
yeah, like game that's the like in my opinion like uh the what's the word I'm looking for? The fallout of Gamergate. It was just kind of this period of time where all these people kind of vast majority of them straight male gamers just getting angry at more or less nothing, like just being angry at like oh, the main character of this game is a woman for no reason, just for brownie points. Why is this being put into my gaming? This isn't what video games are supposed to be about. I remember back in the good old days in the 2000s, and so on and so on. um, it's just kind of this weird period of the internet, and like the fallout of that on gamer culture has been bad. But I feel like just in general, video gaming as a larger community has let in a lot of more people and outsiders who have kind of created a bigger counterbalance against that kind of culture in some corners of the video gaming community.
Well, not to go into this too much, but it definitely still exists, but in a different way.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to go into a bunch of politics right now, but a lot of gamers are under the impression that modern games are all too woke in quotation marks,
Yeah.
and that's just a general problem with the industry, or not the industry, but the community.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's just a manufactured problem for people to push their own ideas onto people. But once again, I don't want to get into it.
Mhm.
That's
Um,
probably smart.
yeah. Um, and sorry, I just got a random friend request. I think getting back on topic here about video games, art forms, and how it can change people. I think that's why so many different types of people can be drawn to video games, because it allows us to have these experiences, these potentially life altering in some cases, or changing, I guess would be a better word to use, experiences. And not only that, but to see themselves reflected in these decisions. Like I think a big part of a lot of games is being like, or art form in general, like being able to relate with the main character. And just because of how interactive video games are as a medium, you can kind of you are physically putting yourself into the protagonist's shoes, so it's even easier to relate with the protagonist and be like, oh, I've been in a situation similar to this, such as bringing, I guess for an example, I'll bring back up Persona 5. In Persona 5, Joker, in his school life, because of a trumped up charge against him. I don't really think that's spoilers, so I don't have to put a spoiler warning. Um, he's kind of looked down upon by all his other schoolmates as a criminal. And because we're put in Joker's shoes, we can really relate with him, um, by thinking like, oh, I've been looked down before. This really sucks, you know. Maybe not to the level of like, people are calling me a criminal, but because we can relate with a personal experience to the main protagonist, it gives us an even stronger bond and can make the story even more impactful than it can, that it won't necessarily can be as impactful in kind of a more traditional form of art.
So I feel like I'd kick myself if we were talking about video games and art, and I didn't bring up my favorite game of all time, Metaphor
Is
Fantasia.
that your favorite game now, like ever?
It's hard. It's hard to say between it and Xenoblade 3.
Hmm.
I think Xenoblade 3 just like barely edges it out, but
I wish I could get into Xenoblade, but they're just too long of games.
it's so worth it, man.
But anyway, continue about
By the
Metaphor.
way, hold on, I'm gonna derail this entire conversation because I don't know where else to say this, but I've been playing Xenoblade X recently. There's no way this game should be looking this good and running this well on a 7-year-old, 8-year-old system,
Is it that good?
and it's a lower file size than what it was on the Wii U, and they added more content.
Dang.
Monolith Soft, you are the best. Anyways, I'm a shill for Monolith or Atlas, which are the people who made Xenoblade and Persona, respectively. But yeah, Metaphor, it's just such a. I don't even know where to like start on it because it's all just a commentary on society, you know?
Mhm.
It brings up so many different issues like economic issues, political issues, and it definitely is like one of the greatest art pieces in gaming that I've ever played. Like, there's a reason why it won the best narrative at the Game Awards because I think it does have one of the best narratives in all of gaming.
Mm.
So yeah, that's another game. If you haven't played it, go check it out.
I really wish I could play it. It needs to come to Switch too. um,
In terms of other games that I had like a this one's not so life changing, but like the first time I played Breath of the Wild, you know, there's that scene where Link runs out of the chamber and you get the wide panoramic view of all of Hyrule. And I mean that is probably the best part, the most well constructed scene in Breath of the Wild.
yeah, definitely like
For sure.
probably. Okay, I'm kind of putting myself out there, but one of the best constructed scenes probably in almost any Nintendo game, I'd argue. But I think we'd be remiss not to mention in the early days of video games being argued as being an art form, what you'll often see on forums and in videos, if you look back far enough, is that you'll often see the Shadow of Colossus being mentioned. So I think we'd be remiss to not mention the Shadow of Colossus, although I don't think any of you guys have played it. I'm in the process of playing it myself, the remaster on PS4.
I've never played it, but I know a decent amount about it.
So I just think we'd be remiss not to at least mention it in this podcast that not only just the Shadow of Colossus, but just um, the just in general, like uh, all the I don't think it was a specific like developer or publisher that worked on Shadow Colossus other than just like Sony Computer Entertainment. I'm googling it right now. Um,
There was. I can't remember off the top of my head
um,
because they made The Last Guardian as well.
yeah, the last Guardian. I think they're making their first new game in a while, or at least some of the people who worked on it.
Yeah, they
Um,
just showed off a new game at the Game Awards or teased it, I think.
yeah, I heard about that, and that's just massive to me because, um, like I said, just the I think it was not only the graphics and the scale of Shadow of Colossus, but also the music and the story that was told really well just through gameplay and not that much dialogue in Shadow of Colossus. Really, just put it down as um, being this work of art that really followed up from its prequel to the game that came before it, Eco, was also really considered in the early days of video gaming, PlayStation 2 era, early 2000s, kind of right around when we got born, um, as these big pieces of art. Like you want proof that video games are an art? Well, go play Eco, go play Shadow of the Colossus. So I just thought we'd be remiss not to at least mention them at some point in this episode, although we don't have that much experience with the games ourselves.
Yeah, I've never even heard of Shadow of Colossus, so
You've never
I
heard
don't
of
have
it?
much to add there. No, I haven't.
Oh well. But yeah, I guess speaking to just more of a personal like games that have changed me throughout my life, um, or maybe I guess I could flip this on my head on its head a little, and a game that wanted to desperately change me and be a big part of my life and kind of wasn't, was the sequel to Super Hot Mind Control Delete. I don't know if any of you guys ever got into Super Hot, but
I
Mind
played the
Control.
VR game once at
Mm.
a friend's house.
I was
I played it once.
I played it a crap ton. I got really really good at the original on Switch. Um, just one of those activities I think I got into over COVID. So I put like a crap ton of hours in and got really good. And then on my laptop, I got Mind Control Delete. And Mind Control Delete just really wants to like hit you over the head with a narrative. More so, like Super Hot was kind of a slow burn, but Mind Control Delete just really wants to hit you over the head with like, why are you still here after the last game? And like this idea of like, um, kind of like a transhumanist, or um, maybe transhumanist isn't the right word for it, but this idea of like the melding of man and machine and stuff like that. And I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a part of the ending of Mind Control Delete is that they make you sit there in the game for an hour doing nothing. You have to watch a loading bar be completed. And the point of it, the developer said the point of it is that you're supposed to contemplate everything that you're being told, um, and the message of the game in that period of time. And it's not good. It's stupid. The gameplay is fun, but I just I could do without them. Just, you know, I think they really missed the mark with trying. They had a good message in mind, but they just really hit you over the head with it a lot. Um, so I think in a way, there there's some games that really want to try hard to like get you to consider something and think about something and change you as a person. And I think almost it's probably the same with any art form. They try so hard, and if you try so hard, you're just going to end up failing and boring your uh, whoever is consuming your piece of media slash art.
Yeah, I feel like in theory that reflective section might sound okay from a developer's perspective, but in reality, it's more like just a thing where the player realizes after a minute or two what's going on and then walks away and grabs something to eat or something like that
Yeah,
and
although
doesn't reflect whatsoever.
in their defense, I think they realized it was a bad idea because I think in a later on patch they might have changed it to 30 minutes or 15 minutes. But that's still such
That's
a long
still too
time
much.
to just be idling on a loading screen so the game can make a point to you, you know?
Like, I think 5 minutes would maybe be the highest I would even consider going with that.
Yeah, I probably
Because
agree with
anything
that.
more than that's ridiculous.
So basically, kind of what my synopsis is there is just relating back to the topic is that just like any art form, sometimes if they just get too carried away with trying to bang an idea over your head, you're just not gonna like it. I don't know if you guys have any experiences like that where maybe a game just you refuse to let it change you, or it just the execution was so bad that you just it didn't come off the way as the developers wanted it to.
Um, There's definitely something out there. I've had that before, but the example's not coming to my mind.
Hmm.
Wait, okay. I got kind of an example. Um, so Peyton, you're not gonna like this because you're not there yet, but Yakuza 5,
Hmm.
which is one of my least favorite games in the series, and this is partially the reason why. Um, I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil it for you, but basically the whole message of the game is to follow your dreams. They say the word dream in the game so much that it should basically be the subtitle. They
Yakuza
push
Dream.
Yakuza 5 dreams.
Yeah, actually, that kind of goes hard.
But yeah, they just try and so much to be like, oh, it's not over for you. You can still be you can still follow your dreams and be what you want to be. And every story does the same thing that the last one did because the story is set into four parts and the first three are all basically the same. It's only the fourth one that I think actually does something because it's a new character who's having their own self uh, self-centered story. Like it barely interacts with the other characters. It doesn't basically get brought up in the rest of the series. So I think that's the best example of that. And the ending that I won't go into also doesn't help.
Hmm. And I don't think, well, actually, I think Talon might have an interesting perspective on this because, for the viewers at home, Talon has basically a class where he often gets assigned games to play. That's the like his homework for the class. Um, and I often hear him complain about the games he has to play, even though they're kind of like monoliths in the gaming sphere because you just like different types of games. So I almost wonder if you have similar experiences in games where people would like vastly disagree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily the same kind of thing of like it beating you over the head with something, but it was Last of Us Part 1 and then also Mass Effect 2.
Mm.
Those games, like, I feel like they're
Those are very
trying.
beloved games.
Yes,
Yes.
I am
Tread
going to
carefully.
upset a lot of people with this statement, but and I've already had to argue with some people on this, but I feel like there's just so much combat involved in the games that like it just feels like you're fighting enemies for the purpose of fighting enemies instead of actually to like move along the story or whatever. And I feel like in those games in particular, I found it really hard to engage with the actual narrative plot of the game just because I was so much more focused on okay, do I have enough ammo to go into this next fight? All right, time to fight like 50 more robots or infected. Cool. And I just wanted to get along with the story. And it also just felt like my characters had plot armor, which I don't like in games. I like it to feel like there's not plot armor given to me, but it felt like I did have massive plot armor in those games, and it kind of took away from my experience.
That's interesting.
I upset a lot of people with that statement.
I will say my
I don't think
only
it's
gripe.
super controversial.
Yeah, come
Extremely.
come to the controller collective for the spiciest takes on the internet. I'll say my only gripe with The Last of Us Part One. I have not personally played it, but I know what the ending is, and I think the ending's basically just the trolley problem. And somebody Joel chooses to kill more people than to save one person who's important to him. And I think kind of the point was to show how Joel is a flawed character, but at the same time, well, I guess I should shut my mouth because that is a pretty good way to show off like how flawed a character can be. But
Yeah, I mean, the ending, yeah, I mean, it can be looked at under multiple ethical lenses, and you'd probably come to different results because while Joel does, like, uh, save Ellie's life uh, in exchange for a lot of other human lives, at the same time, most players go along with that decision just because it feels right to do. But
mhm.
also, if we think about it under like a utilitarian lens, for example, is it really that selfish to do it if a potential cure can be found by saving Ellie? I'm not sure. And I think it depends on like what ends up happening in the second game.
Yeah,
Does a cure get found, which makes it hard to look at ethically.
I will say
But
Joey,
yeah,
how much do you know about the second
I
game?
know dramatically
nothing.
less about the second game.
Well, I know how it starts.
I
I
think
don't know anything
I
past
think a
that.
lot of people know how it starts because of how controversial it was.
Yeah, because Joel gets murdered within like the first 20 minutes of the
Yeah,
game or
and
something.
they made him look older in trailers to not spoil that. That he gets killed off really early on.
But yeah, like the narrative parts of that game were great. I just wish there was more of that
I,
because
s- I
most of the game.
suppose we're sorry to cut in, but I kind of felt I knew like your debate about like too much fighting. Um, my argument would almost be that fighting helps to serve the narrative in the sense that in many ways the last of us is supposed to be sort of like the survival of humanity, and how much you're having to just fight to stay alive kind of helps to feed that narrative of how much of a struggle it is to live in that universe, and how much of a fight for survival it is. So all of these fights feed into that narrative. I just wonder what your perspective is on that kind of take.
Yeah, I feel like that's very valid, and that's probably what they were going for. But in my mind, it got to a point where it just felt like I knew that I'd faced those kinds of enemies before. I wasn't going to die to them. So it mostly, like, it seemed inconsequential when I ran into
Mm-hmm.
them, even though it was probably supposed to, like, if I came across an infected in real life, oh my god, I would be terrified. But when I saw one in game, it was like, oh gosh, another one of these things.
I almost
Okay.
wonder if that's a byproduct of how much competitive esports you play. Just, do you know what I'm kind of getting at here?
Yeah, potentially. But it's like I didn't like have any reaction when I saw him. But oh, I had a thought earlier. It's escaping me. Oh no. It'll come back to me. I'll remember it.
Talon's lost thought. Tune in next week
No.
to figure out what Talon's lost thought was.
So for me, I never really saw the appeal of any survival horror games like The Last of Us until I played the Resident Evil 2 remake.
I've heard
Um,
it's really good.
I, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's like the first horror game that I pretty much sought out on my own. I'm not really into horror games, but I'm more open to trying them now.
Mm. For me,
But,
sorry,
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, okay. I was just gonna bring up my experience with survival horror is that like I'm kind of like a really big wimp when it comes to horror of almost all stripes, but I will say kind of my preferred poison when it comes to horror games these days is a lot of psychological horror, and I think that's mostly due to influences of games like Amori. But I also see how great survival horror can be, especially from the psychological perspective of just barely scraping by to try and survive. And that was thanks to a game called Signalis that I'm sure some people in the audience have heard of. And it's a game I've recommended to Jarek because it is a brilliant survival horror game.
So
Yeah,
I
kind of what I.
remembered. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Jeez. Okay. So kind of what I was, and now I'm boring you.
What?
It's nothing.
Go ahead. Just cut it.
No, I'm leaving that in.
What? No.
Okay, go ahead, Jarek.
I'm throwing.
What I was kind of getting at with survival horror, Talon was talking about how the combat feels repetitive, and I think the best survival horror experience you'll ever have is the first one you play.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, you'll start out with that kind of mentality that, in Resident Evil, you shoot zombies. It's a zombie apocalypse game. So you'll start out with the mentality that, oh God, I need to kill this thing. I need to shoot it, shoot it, shoot it, so it won't come back to life, so I can get through this area quickly. But as you kind of go through the game, you'll realize, okay, if I shoot it once in the head, it'll fall. It won't be dead, but you can easily get past it. And I think that kind of repetitive combat experience kind of leads to the experience you gain as a player, and like that's supposed to show through your character. And I feel like that won't happen if you continue to play survival horror, because then you'll kind of be used to the whole routine of, one shot, move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
If it's supposed to get worse from there, I don't think I want to play any more survival horror games.
I will say, as regard to that, I think veterans of survival horror will definitely enjoy Signalis, because it mixes with that formula quite heavily, in not a way that I want to spoil for anyone who hasn't played it, but it's just something worth mentioning.
Yeah, and I'll jump in real quick. I know we are very far off from when I originally forgot what I was going to say, but I remembered what I was going to say.
Yippee!
It was that I feel like the purpose of the combat in Last of Us specifically, because a lot of the game is walking between areas to do tasks, and it's Joel making small talk with Ellie in between the combat. And I feel like that is kind of one of the more successful attempts to like immerse the player more in the world, because you just start building this bond with Ellie, and by the time you get to the ending of the game, you don't want to let Ellie die, so you want to save her. And I think that's the one thing that the combat does for the good of the game, but I just don't like it.
Hmm. Um, well, um, just not to like distract from what you just said, but uh, kind of I've been remembering a game that I would also want to bring into the conversation about a game that I think um, is kind of like a before and after, um, especially for me. Like after I played this game, um, and I guess kind of what I'm realizing is that a lot of my favorite games kind of revolve about around making a hard decision. Like in Undertale, you make the hard decision to like go pacifist or a genocide route, or even maybe a neutral route. But there's an indie game called One Shot. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Um, but
Nope.
it was originally a game that was put out for uh, a game jam. So it was done in, I think, a week, maybe a month. Um, and kind of as the name suggests, you only had one shot in order to finish the game. So you had to finish it in one um, sit down and play session. I don't think it was as long as the full game is, because after the game jam was successful, they turned the game into a full game. But the original game jam, I think, was shorter. The idea is you're playing. You're It has a lot of fourth wall breaking aspects. So you, the player, are kind of distinguished as being separate from the main character, Nico, or Neko. I kind of blanking on their name. I believe it's Nico. So the main character, Nico, is a cat person who was put into the game. Um, and they're considered the savior by all these other NPCs because they can communicate with the player and the player tells them what to do, but also they hold a light bulb that needs to be placed um, into a lighthouse, basically, which is the active sun for the world. So Nico is the bearer of the sun of the entire world, and since the sun has gone out in this world, all the residents, like a lot of the society of the world you're in, has been crumbling and decaying because they have no more sun. Um, and so in the original game, you could only beat it in one run through, as the name suggests, like I mentioned earlier. Because if you were to close the game, Nico would have disappeared because you could no longer hear like the voice of the player, and the sun would have broken, um, and you basically never would be able to complete the game. Um, which the full game kind of gives it a nod to this. Um, by every time you close the game and come back, there's a little text box that says Nico shivers because Nico, kind of like referring to like Nico couldn't feel the presence of the player anymore. But the the fourth wall breaking nature of the game, and also just the way where the narrative goes, and that there's not really any combat or anything like that, but there's a lot of puzzle solving and stuff like that. Um, Brings it to a really good like height of tension at the very end of the game, where you're faced with a decision um, that I won't spoil because I think everyone should experience it. But it really brings up a lot of moral questions, and kind of this idea of um, sentience in video game, and what is the self, and what makes something sentient, and many other questions. So if you take nothing away from the podcast today, uh, it's that you should go play One Shot.
Play Xenoblade 3 first. I think we're definitely over time here, so does anyone have any closing thoughts that they want to share?
um,
Nope.
all I have to say is that I think, um, just in general, uh, put yourself out there, play and experience a game, and you know, experience it as an art form, and see where the questions of its narrative bring you and how it can change you, because it's a beautiful part of gaming.
I think there were some points here where we did kind of lose the point of the episode, but overall, um, to answer our central message, yes, video games are an art form and should be celebrated as such.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, every person can have their own opinions and their own tastes in art, but uh, no one should be, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Invalidated.
Yeah, for what they prefer in their art. Like, like let's say I recommend a game to Talon and he's like, "Oh, I hate this game." I don't care if he hates it. If he goes and plays Xenoblade 3 and he hates it, I'm not gonna, you know, think less of him because he hates my favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
And that's a problem that a lot of gamers have.
Hmm. Well,
Or I hate Xenoblade 3.
You've never played it, so you don't get to have
Yeah,
it.
you're right.
well,
So yeah, I think that's it for this week.
yeah. Thank you for tuning in.
Definitely, definitely a heavier episode at some points, but
Hmm.
I think it was good overall.
Yeah.
So join us next week. Our classic catchphrase. Join us for whatever we decide to talk about next.
See ya.
Bye.